mentioned, sir, if I can recollect what you've written, ease of doing business clearly is a big pillar of the entire Make in India campaign, which I think there is a lot of action happening on, spearheaded by yourself. The other three that you mentioned were availability of labor, availability of land, and availability of capital. Specifically the first two of labor and land, you mentioned that briefly. What is your own sense? Are you disappointed by the speed of progress? Or are you still hopeful for the future because it's too early? Are we being over-enthusiastic in our expectation that land acquisition and labor will resolve itself very quickly?
Well, you know, the labor laws are truly antiquated and very outdated, and they need to radically change. I think more has been done in the last 1 year on putting labor laws on track in terms of just doing away with inspections or introducing computerized inspection and taking away the power of inspectors, allowing Apprenticeship Act to move forward. Several very radical changes have taken place in the last 1 year. More changes than what they've taken place in 3 to 4 decades. But I think the big ticket labor changes are still due. A lot of work has already been done. But I think truly if India wants to do labor-intensive manufacturing, and there's no reason why India should lose its position as far as textile manufacturing is concerned to Bangladesh or Vietnam. There's no reason why we shouldn't have become the electronic manufacturing center across the world and lose that position to China. It simply happened because your labor laws are totally outdated. You need to just scrap them totally. Allow people to just do large-scale labor-intensive manufacturing because you need to create jobs. So my belief is that you need radical dose of changes in labor laws. The land laws, you know, I think was what was drafted out by Mr. Jairam Ramesh was the most complex, the most difficult. I've read that act about 210 times. I've not understood that act even now. So I think it was the most complex piece of legislation which can be ever drafted. And this act needs to be just totally rewritten into just plain 3 pages. And if center is finding it politically difficult because of the upper house, then just leave it to the states. Those states who want to move forward. Actually, what India needs to do is just create 10 champion states. You know, after all, Gujarat grew at higher rates than China throughout the last decade. So you need 10 Indian states to do that. Just grow at 10% plus year after year for the next 3 decades, India will grow. And those states, there's a challenge on the political leadership in the states. They have to deliver. And if they don't deliver, they'll be thrown out. So they'll change the law. They'll change the act. And let me assure you that increasingly in India, good governance is becoming good politics simply because it's the middle class is taking over. You know, by 2024, if you read the new NCAR report, 48% of India will be all middle class. They'll all ask for roads, electricity, corridors, all this, ports. They will all ask for infrastructure. They will not go for caste and class. And therefore, India is radically changing. And if the political system, if the state is not able to deliver that, they won't be able to survive even for 1 year. So land and law will change. It's inevitable. They're totally antiquated. Indians want growth. The aspiration is growth. Young India wants India to grow at 10 to 11% per annum year after year.
Okay, on land, and it fundamentally comes down to the fact, and I completely agree, on state-level competitiveness, because not only are elections taking place on that basis, re-election of governments, and we've seen 3 or 4 governments have been elected on the basis of development. So that is definitely a shift in the way the narrative at the state level is taking place. So there is no option, it'll happen. But I just have a suggestion, sir, on land. And while this will happen at the state level, we understand that there is adequate land between defense, public sector undertakings, railways, and state governments and central governments. So each state can have, depending on its local requirements, a different law. Actually, what will, and Mr. Kant mentioned this about EPC and annuity projects, that has yet to take off on the ground. That's infrastructure. Infrastructure needs to get going, not only for the sake of Make in India, but for the economy and employment in general. Construction is the 2nd largest employer after agriculture. And we need that. Now, the question is, how do we do it? Certainly, EPC contracts will help. There's no doubt about it. But can 2016 be declared as the year of execution? Can we just execute on all the policies that have been put into position right now and monitor them centrally?
Very well said, Mr. Sondi. If I can just add on the land part, I think the formula being applied by the Andhra Pradesh government on the land pooling maybe can be a good benchmark for others to follow as well. If I can turn to you, Mr. Kripalu, your own points.
So there's nothing further I really want to add on land and labor, and I completely agree and resonate with the comments that have been made. But I do want to come back to this whole point about the demographic dividend, about youth, and the fact that the youth attitudinally, both in terms of work and in terms of play, are a little different from the people of the previous generation. You know, again, I want to put the lens of our own industry there. The youth, India has amongst the lowest per capita consumptions of alcohol and alcohol products in the world. The youth who are coming into drinking age today, I think, want to drink better and drink responsibly. 20, 30 years ago, there was a fine line between having one drink and being called a drunkard. I think that has significantly changed today. And I think that we have to, through deregulation at a state level, make it easier for people to work hard through all the initiatives that we're taking, right, to provide jobs, but to also unwind after work. And I think that's a very integral part of how youth wants to be. And I see a huge opportunity to open up in a controlled way, you know, places where the youth can go and hang out and have a good time. Because today, there aren't enough such places, and because of which the industry gets pushed underground, right? And then you tend to have issues and tragedies that none of the governments want, neither at the center or the state. So that's really the perspective that I wanted to bring into this conversation.
This panel is, by the way, sponsored by Diageo, so I think it's a good time to have that spot in. But on the same note, Mr. Kant, if I can just add, I was quite surprised to hear that from Japan, which is a huge partner for us from investment perspective, we just have 7,000 Japanese here in India, whereas you have 20 times more that number in Shanghai alone. To the point about making life a little more easier for people to live in, are we doing enough on the cultural side, you think, or is you know, golf courses, places where you can unwind?
Yeah, you know, well, my personal belief is that we need to add in a lot more. We need to make our evenings far more easier, nightlife better. We need to provide, you know, you've got huge heritage, fascinating culture, but I think, you know, after a hard day's work, you need a break, and you need to add a little more value in the evening and late night time in India, definitely.
I think you agree with us.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thanks. Mark, anything you want to add quickly?
I don't think I've got much more to add. It's a very complex subject, labour law and land law. I think the comment that Mr. Kant made was very relevant. I think the competitive federalism of the states is the answer. This morning I met with Chief Minister from Karnataka, a state that we know well, but he surprised me in their forthcoming to make land available at their aerospace park. If certain incentives, if you collaborated with DRDO on certain projects, would make land available. That's the answer, I think, to this very complex issue. Labour law, it's imperative for foreign companies who are going to come, invest and build their plants here, that we together, industry and government, deliver skilled, trained workforce and a responsible workforce as well. Is very, very key to that. Other factors that would help the Making India story, we look forward to the delivery of the GST, taxation, improving the, or enforcing IP would be another good step. Moving forward the patent process expeditiously is another one. And together achieving a global quality assurance standard in the factories, maintaining and sustaining as well as delivering that.
By the way, Mr. Khan, just to buttress what Mark just mentioned, we did a poll of 30 MNCs operating in India on what are the key issues they're actually worried about. GST topped by far, and actually land and labor came way below the list.
I just wanted to, I think GST is very important, and that's why I talked about political responsibility across, whether you're governing the country or whether you're in the opposition. I think there's need for responsibility to take the Indian story to a high growth rate story. I just wanted to touch on this intellectual property issue, and let me tell you that India is a great believer in intellectual property. We respect people's intellectual property. We are extremely aggressive about it. India has put a very high level task force to draft out an intellectual property rights policy, and that policy will be put before the cabinet very shortly. But more than that, we are recruiting about 1,000 young examiners, and we'll bring our patent pendency to 0 level in 18 months' time.
Right. Thanks.
And we are determined, we put everything online, we are determined to make this the best patent regime across the world.
Super. Nikhil, land, labor, and capital. Now, banking system is stressed. Your bank is doing well, but overall banking system seems to be stressed. Is there capacity in the banking system to actually fund Make in India? Is that capital available?
The sectoral approach that has been adopted in Make in India, yes, we are all privy to stories of stress prevailing in the banking system, and obviously growth not picking up. Obviously, as was concurred earlier, yes, a lot of work in progress, which is where, again, coming back to this, to the focus on the sectoral approach, we have identified, at least as a bank, and we have reason to believe that many other banks in the country are also following a similar approach. Sectorally looking at sectors like renewable energy. Right. It's a sector that has seen huge fill-up from the central government. If you interestingly look at statistics globally, the renewable energy sector is growing in India at about 59%, in the UK at 12%, and it is a decline across the globe otherwise. So this is a sector of interest to both UK and India. That's a sector we believe is a very, very strong sector, for the future. Sectors like healthcare, MSMEs. MSME focus, I guess, over the last few years has increased substantially. And somehow what our experience has been that the stress levels in the MSME side tend to be lesser. I don't know because either they're smart businessmen or they grow very, very slowly. Might be any different reasons, or they don't have as many land acquisition issues as a large corporate might have. So that is another sector on which concentration is yielding good results. I think there will be a lot of interest moving forward on the railways. The railways, Honorable Railways Minister has already set up a 8.5 lakh crore, funding plan. There is enough capital in the system to support it, by the way. I've been privy to a meeting that we had with the Honorable Minister and his team. The 8.5 lakh crores is on the table. It is already there. 1.5 lakh crores has been.
That's a heartening message, Nikhil.
It's on the table.